As the Great Valley School District works on its budget every year, one of the questions often raised has to do with our per pupil expenditure. That is, how much money we spend per student in the district, or the amount of money a district spends to educate one child. While it may seem like a seemingly easy thing to compare one district's per pupil calculation to another, per pupil expenditure is actually a little more complicated than taking the amount of money in the general fund and dividing it by the number of students enrolled in a district. Why? Because not all districts include the same costs in their general fund. Therefore, while we may be comparing apples to apples when we look at various districts' per pupil expenditures, sometimes the variety of apples in the basket can vary. Let's take a closer look at how district budgeting may affect per pupil expenditure calculations. In Great Valley, our general fund includes the following expenses: personnel costs, staffing and healthcare, for example; supplies and disposables, things like paper and classroom supplies; equipment, which includes things like microscopes, computers, and other technical supplies; services to outside agencies, like charter schools and special education placements and services; maintenance, to maintain or upgrade facilities; transportation, to get students back and forth to our schools and to the schools we service every day; and finally, debt, any money owed for building projects, technology initiatives, or new schools, for example. All of these categories of expense are included in Great Valley's general fund. In the 2016-2017 school year, our general fund totaled $95,650,000. Our enrollment was 4,000. And so, our cost per pupil totaled $23,900. However, if you look at other districts, what you may find is that they don't include some of the categories of expenses in their general funds. For example, it is possible and legal for a district not to include some personnel costs in their general fund. Instead, the cost of coaches and other student activity-related services may be allocated to a student activity fund. Or, a district could allocate the costs associated with equipment, maintenance, and debt in its capital reserve fund and not in its general fund. Again, while these budgeting strategies are legal and acceptable ways to allocate funds, doing so removes the costs from the general fund. As a result, districts with a reduced general fund may see a lower per pupil cost. All that to say, Great Valley admits that its per pupil expenditure is higher than some of our surrounding districts. That is primarily because of higher staffing levels at the secondary schools. Next year's budget, that is the 2017-2018 budget, proposes a reduction of staff, primarily at the secondary level, so that we are more aligned to the board-approved class size guidelines. Recently, the district began using a program called Forecast 5. This program allows us to look at specific areas to see how we compare with other districts, and allows us a greater understanding of factors that impact not only our general fund, but subsequently our per pupil expenditure calculation. This chart shows how Great Valley's per pupil expenditure compares with two districts to whom we are often compared. As we can see in the chart, Great Valley's per pupil expenditure is higher than both Unionville's and TE's. For this presentation, we are using the last available financial information, that is, from the 2015-2016 school year. If we remove debt from the calculation, the chart looks like this. While we still show a higher per pupil cost, the gap lessens significantly between the districts. The largest difference between districts is, in fact, reduced to half of what it was when debt was a factor. That is because Great Valley has accumulated more debt than these other districts in recent years to pay for new or renovated buildings. Another area of interest that impacts per pupil expenditures is special education. Again, we can compare Great Valley to the same two districts. In this chart, we can see that we are spending more in this area than the other two districts. more than 3% more when we compare to TE. This use of this chart doesn't intend to blame any one area more than another, but it is helpful in understanding how the needs of one population can vary from district to district, and how those needs impact costs. Since we know that staffing is a cause of our higher per-pupil costs, we can look at information that helps us to better understand this factor. Data here is from the 2016 school year. This is a look at the student-teacher ratio for the 12 districts in Chester County. Phoenixville Area School District is the only district whose student-teacher ratio is lower than Great Valley's. Avon Grove's ratio is the highest in the county, with a correspondingly lower cost per pupil. What we see here is a historical look at enrollment in 3 districts. Again, Great Valley, Tredyffr and Easttown, and Unionville-Chadds Ford, charted against the full-time equivalent number of staff over the same period. And if we look specifically at Great Valley, compared to Tredyffr and Easttown and Unionville-Chadds Ford, the districts to which we are most often compared, the student-teacher ratios district-wide look like this. We can see that both TE and Unionville have higher student-to-teacher ratios than those we see in Great Valley. In 2011, for example, Great Valley showed a ratio of 11.66 students to every teacher, while TE showed 12.86 students. Over time, we see that Great Valley student-to-teacher ratio has remained lower than both of the other districts to which it is compared in this chart. If we look specifically at the high school level, this is the data we have. While both TE and Unionville-Chadds Ford lowered their student-teacher ratio from 2015 to 2016, their ratios are still slightly higher than those seen in Great Valley, where we have 11.69 students to every full-time equivalent staff member. And at the middle school level, both middle schools in TE show higher student-teacher ratios than in Great Valley. This year, the Unionville-Chadds Ford ratio fell below Great Valley's. And finally, here are the ratio comparisons at the elementary level for elementary schools in the same 3 districts. You can see that at the elementary level, Great Valley's ratios fall between Tredyffr and Easttown's, which are higher, and Unionville-Chadds Ford's, which are lower. While Great Valley School District continues to value small class sizes, we cannot ignore that the student-teacher ratio directly impacts our costs. As the Great Valley School Board considers its budget for the 2017-2018 school year, factors like the ones we discussed in this video will continue to be reviewed and evaluated. But charts alone don't tell the full story. The administration will fully consider policies, like those associated with class size, and the integrity of our educational program, as it makes its recommendation to the school board. Our community is invited to stay involved and informed as budget considerations continue throughout the spring.